Breaking out the mechs to survive underground in the recent Helldivers 2 update got me thinking about the idea of infantry support vehicles. It's a very specific niche that has a lot of crossover with other stuff, so it often gets overlooked in fiction. But it does get filled on the ground, in the air, and even way up in space, if you want to stretch the meaning far enough. From hogs to hogs, this is what today's video will be looking at. As mentioned, infantry support vehicles are a super specific thing that barely shows up in fiction, especially on the ground. Generally they're either a tank and meant to do tanky things, or they're infantry fighting vehicles that can carry troops as well as fight. And that's fair enough, even in real life there's a lot of confusion over this type of vehicle, like with the now cancelled M10 Booker. People thought it was a light tank when that wasn't what its job was supposed to be. It wasn't intended for scouting or scooting around to exploit vulnerabilities. Instead, it was meant to be a well-protected, self-propelled, direct-fire gun used in concert with infantry, taking out tough targets like gun emplacements or bunkers. That's why it came from the Mobile Protected Firepower program. The clue was in the name. There's been plenty of similar ground vehicles through the decades, all with varying specifications and roles. There's the M10's predecessor, the Striker MGS, Germany's cute little weasel AWCs, Sweden had the IKV-91, and World War II saw a lot of them, generally under the blanket term of assault gun. Think of the Stugs and various howitzer-equipped vehicles. Back then, the Brits had the concept of the infantry tank, which can probably count here as well, but even other types of tanks were often used for this task. Having a big gun and armour just makes them naturally well suited to dealing with a position fortified against infantry attacks. So, because of how specific this vehicle type really is, it's hard to think of fictional things that can fit. As I said, they're either a tank, IFV, or even an APC if they're old enough. Like Mass Effect's Mako and Hammerhead are both IFVs because of their carrying capacity and, being classified as that. What do you think Skynet's HK ground vehicles count as? The Talos from Foxhole definitely counts because it's directly inspired by a Second World War assault tank. I'm sure there's probably something in Warhammer 40k that does the job instead of being an IFV or a demolition vehicle or something. It's a really hard concept to think about, it's just such a tiny niche and also depends on how you look at it. Like, Halo has a few things that could count, like the Covenant's Revenant or the UNSC's upgunned Warthogs. These are all very exposed but still fit the idea of being a big mobile gun. The later games introduced various mechs that could also count, but I'll come back to mechs later, since for now we turn our eyes to the sky for some close air support. This is a lot more well known and so much easier to understand than the mixed up ground vehicle stuff. In real life, the A-10 and the AC-130 are both very famous aircraft because of their dedication to ground strike missions, which is why they've been in all sorts of games and movies and the general public consciousness for many, many years. Helicopters too, to some degree, since they do the same job, though they just aren't as popular as big planes with big guns. That is why fictional stuff like the Eagle in Helldivers 2 copies the Warthog with its twin engines and big, nose-mounted multi-barreled cannon. Of course, Helldivers also has the ships providing heavy supporting fire from much higher up. This has its similarities to the AC-130, especially with the variety of weapons the Super Destroyer carries. The weapons on these ships are also all mounted to the underside of the craft, showing their clear focus on providing fire in that direction only, rather than being designed for ship-to-ship combat. That, plus waiting for targeting orders from Helldivers on the surface, shows these craft can definitely be thought of as being intended for infantry support. But I also feel like they're somewhat analogous to the idea of ocean-going ships doing shore bombardment. This is the reason the US reactivated its battleships during the Cold War, despite their obsolescence in the face of ever-improving torpedoes and anti-ship missiles. These ships just had something unique in that they could send an insane amount of explosives downrange at a decently low cost per shot when compared to missiles. Yeah, they were limited to targets within about 30 kilometers, and yeah, the idea of cost per shot ignores how many crew a battleship needs, but big guns! Technology marches ever onwards though, and now these behemoths are sat around as museums, with fewer, smaller guns on smaller ships firing much more accurate rounds taking over their job, alongside other options like longer-range missiles and aircraft. This task was actually what the US was doing all that research into railguns for, since a higher velocity projectile has a longer range. In Helldivers, it's a bit different because the range of all the ship's weapons is the same, leaving the rail cannon there as a weapon to devastate a single target. Super destroyers and eagles aren't the only things providing fire support for Helldivers though, since there's also the massive Democratic Space Station. Yeah, it's got carrier bays and provides other bonuses, but it also has its own guns to contribute to barraging the surface. In fact, the original version of its high-caliber explosive barrage was completely uncontrolled, indiscriminately striking anything on the ground. It took out as many Helldivers as it did bugs and bots. Not very supportive really, which was why it was changed. Now we get back to the mechs. The recent update for the game added caves that really highlighted the potential for the mechs to play into this role of infantry support. Since the caves prevent you from calling in all that other fire support we've just talked about, you have to instead make do with what you can carry, and the mechs can carry a lot of firepower. I find the quad autocannon one to be especially useful because its explosive rounds force the burrowing bugs up out of the ground and can deal with nests as well. Speaking more broadly about mechs, and the smaller ones, walkers, and even power armor can all slot pretty well into the infantry support role. It does depend on the capabilities of the thing though, as well as its armament. Like the power armor in Crisis is more its own thing, for example, but an Astartes Dreadnought is absolutely right there as an assault gun sort of thing. It's clearly not a tank, but it can still bring the hurt to targets that infantry might be struggling with. But I will say that, just like tanks, mechs and walkers can still fall into the same confusion over what an infantry support vehicle even does. Maybe they're also used as scouts, maybe they're the mainline armoured vehicle, maybe they're tank hunters. Take the AT-ST for example. We know it's a scout vehicle from its name, but it's more often been shown supporting infantry. What would something smaller like a Tachkoma count as? Yeah, their armament is pretty light, but so is the Weasels, and the Tachkomas are part of a Black Ops unit rather than a frontline one. Maybe the power armor from the same show that's more heavily armed and armored would fit in better on the front line. For mechs overall, it's a bit hard to try to place them into a support role because, more often than not, they're depicted as being their own special thing. Can you think of some more that might fit into the infantry support role? Maybe the Atlas from Mass Effect 3. As we can see, this type of vehicle does exist, but because it's a role that can be performed by so many other, more generalist vehicles, it's not surprising that we don't see many of them in real life or fiction. So is this really a niche that needs filling, or is the concept just too specialised? We saw a lot of confusion over it with the M10 Booker, and trying to get across the same idea in fiction is just going to hit the same problems, unless you do something like a mech that's clearly very different to a tank. So I don't really know what my conclusion is on these vehicles. The idea of them fascinates me because I do see the point in them, but also it's a job that can be so easily done by so many other things. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate, fighter and carrier design reference books, as well as 1 week early access to upcoming videos. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.